Hey everybody, welcome back to the cabin. Before it gets too noisy in here with the fans as the sun comes on and hits those solar panels, I want to give you a quick update. First of all, this is likely going to be the last garden update video on this channel for a while, and I wanted to make it before I get back into full-time building on the cabin. The reason for that is that I'm finally finished. I'm finally done all of the things I had planned for the 2 gardens for this year. As far as infrastructure and then planting of the actual plants, perennials and annuals. So it is June 4th, I think, today, and well, it's the beginning of the day, so I do have some work to do. So before everything actually is finished, I need to get outside and actually do that work. And the last bit of it is to finish the fence on the north side of the garden, and I finally got the hazelnut bushes that I had ordered several months ago. They were delayed. They were supposed to arrive 2 or 3 weeks ago. They finally arrived yesterday, so I drove a few hours to pick those up. So 100 hazelnuts and a couple of a few other miscellaneous plants. So I'm going to basically be like the Johnny Appleseed of hazelnuts and travel around the 130 acres planting these 100 hazelnut bushes. A bunch right here close to the cabin and around the greenhouse garden itself. And then my main trail where all the wildlife uses on a regular basis. I'm going to plant all along there. I'm not sure how many, a few dozen probably, and then sort of scatter them throughout the edges. The edge habitat is where the most diversity occurs and where wildlife really congregates around all that diversity. So a lot of vegetative plant growth is where there's an opening in the forest, whether trees fall down or I cut them down, create some sunlight hitting the forest floor, or naturally occurring in edges of meadows like this, which was originally a beaver pond and now is eventually revert back to forest. But in the meantime, it's herbaceous basically. So all the fringes of this, I've got raspberries and other berries, now these hazelnuts. So I'll plant those. Now in the greenhouse itself, the heat it's been on and off. We got a really hot, dry spell really early in May, and now we're back to more seasonal temperatures. So in the mid or low 20s Celsius during the day, and then moderate amounts of cloud cover and rain. But this kind of took off when that heat hit, and now it's kind of settling into a normal growth pattern. So much hotter in here obviously than outside. So the tomatoes and the peppers are loving it. Now, a lot of this stuff, if you've been watching the other channel, my Sean James channel, you would have seen some of these updates, and I'll continue to do updates on the gardens on that channel, but I'm less likely to show any of it on this channel. So I've shown people and told people about worms, for example, that I added to these beds. Now, one of the things I did not clarify on the other channel is that the red wigglers that I distributed throughout these garden beds, and as well in the raised garden beds at the other garden, you have to feed. Those are surface feeding worms essentially. So all of the debris that settles on top of the soil is what they eat and what they process. So I have to continually feed them at the surface level. I'll put down all of the fine wood chips, for example, on top of the bed. But also I like to just chop and drop all of the vegetation that grows up either in weed form or that I've planted specifically for compost. So comfrey and stinging nettles, for example. I'll cut those, just lay them on the garden bed or break them up a little bit, throw them on the garden bed. The worms come up, feed on that, and transfer those nutrients into the soil. So that's happening throughout these beds as well. Now the other thing is, I mentioned pollinators, so I leave the window open behind you here all the time during the summer. Now that the temperatures are warm enough, I took the screen out and I keep the glass up. So pollinators can, and beneficial insects that eat the pests that can feed on my crops, they're able to come and go through that opening. Now a lot of these plants don't really need insects to pollinate them. Tomatoes, for example, if there's enough breeze, and there typically is from this fan over here, keep some movement, and as those plants sort of vibrate, the pollen's able to get onto the other flowers and it pollinates itself. or pollinate each other. Peppers can be similar too. They don't need as much insect pollination, but all of the plants do better if they do have access to insect pollinators, because they tend to visit every single flower and transfer the pollen between them. Whereas I can't guarantee that wind is going to do that, especially with inconsistent wind that you would get in here. I've got just 2 fans at this level, and also me just moving around is not quite as effective as bees and stuff moving around, butterflies and flies and other things. So I'm happy with the growth, and I keep pruning out the suckers, but the tomatoes have finally reached the trellis level or the arbor level at cattle panel, so I'll just make sure that they continue to weave in and out so they train themselves up and over. The peppers, I need to get some small stakes in here just to keep them upright, tied to. The sweet potatoes that I showed you that I planted on the other channel, I showed you on the other channel that I planted them. They're growing. They've already grown like 6 inches or 8 inches. It's been, what, 4 days or something like that? So they're going to do extremely well. They really love this heat. And I see naturally they're already growing towards the outside because the sun shines. That's southeast right there. As you can see, the sun's coming up over the trees, travels across the sky this way. So this is south facing. The vegetation leans naturally that way. But what we've done is put this sort of trellis up with all these horizontal wires, and sweet potato won't naturally climb and grip to anything, so we're just gonna, as they grow, continue just to weave them in and out all the way up to the top, and maybe even add some more levels of wire so that I can get them to go right up as high as possible, so they provide some shade in the real heat of the summer in July and August. Shade to the rest of the garden, because it can get actually too hot in here. And normally, like last year, and normally what you would do, either one of 2 things you can do in a greenhouse in the heat of the summer. Last year I hung this across here. That provided some reflection, that reflect the heat and sun back out, and also provided some shade from the intense sun back at the back of the beds here. The other thing you can do is whitewash this with like a lime. Just wash, basically like painting it with a thin layer of paint, the entire greenhouse. And then over the course of the summer with all the rain, that slowly washes off, so by fall most of it's gone. Or you can, I can't power, well I guess I could power wash, but hooked up the pump to the stream and put it under pressure. You could wash it off, but anyway, most of it will be gone by fall anyway. But I'm not doing that. So I don't have to worry about it. I do have my snake or 2 living in these beds somewhere. One of the spots I like to hide is under that. And also at that end, they're just garter snakes, eastern garter snakes. They get not too big, and they're not venomous, so I don't have to worry about getting bit by them. They're not the most effective predator as far as keeping rodents down. We don't have rats in the forest. I've never seen a rat anywhere. I've only ever seen 1 rat ever, actually, in Canada, and not in a forest setting, not in a sort of a wilderness setting. You wouldn't see that. So we do have a lot of mice, though, wood mice and field mice. And as they come in and get around the beds, they're doing a little bit of damage. So they've eaten pretty well every pea. We've got 1 here, 2 there that have sprouted, but they haven't even flowered yet. And a couple, they seem to be leaving the center beds alone. I've actually got my first 2 or 3 peas of the season there right now. But anyway, if the mice have nests in here, have babies, those garter snakes will eat those at least when they're smaller. And then they'll also eat other kinds of bugs and stuff that may be pests in the garden. So I will leave those snakes in here, in other words. Oh, he's just having a blast out there chasing squirrels. Now these are potatoes that I actually grew from seed, not from potatoes, but actual seed that came from the flower, of course. One of the reasons I do want the insects in here is to pollinate these flowers if I'm going to try to save the seed from these again. So these are Clancy. It is a hybrid, so they wouldn't come true to form. And these won't even be true to form because they were grown from seed. So be interested to see what they're like, how good they are, and how much diversity I end up creating by continuing to save seed from the potatoes. So I might do that with some other varieties as well and see how that works. Anyway, I planted these back in May. I'm not sure how far into the soil I put them, probably 6 inches below the soil level surface. And now I've been banking them up or hilling them up with the leftover moss that I collected to put between the logs. It's been all on the ground here drying, so I'm banking that up because the tubers themselves are going to form off the stem. The plants are growing fast and they're getting a little bit too high, so the bed's not really built properly to accommodate hilling up potatoes. So I will collect some more moss and see. I'll probably just get them up another few inches and then let them go from there and just see how many potatoes they produce in this layer of moss. That's sort of an experiment. I've got these potatoes growing outside in 2 places too though, so I'll see using the different methods which one performs the best and just how productive this particular potato is. I think what I'm going to do with most of these is prune them back to one stem, 1 leader, so I can get them to climb fairly high and maybe let them spread out a bit up there. But they're pretty tight together. I've only got them spaced maybe 18 inches apart, and they're going to be competing with each other. And I don't, because we're in a greenhouse, don't get as good of airflow. There's no wind coming through here all the time. These fans can only do so much as far as equal circulation or wind throughout the air circulation throughout the space. Not as even. So by keeping these pruned fairly thin, they'll have better air circulation and they'll be less prone to disease. So I think that one's already naturally doing that. So is that one. So is that one. It's really just this. Those 2 have branches, so like a Y branching in 2 different directions. So 2 leaders that are going to go up. So maybe I'll prune those back. I'm just pinching out the suckers, the little branches that come out of the V between main branches. That sucks a lot of the energy out of the plant that focuses on that, which is not going to produce any tomatoes. So taking those out allows it to put its energy back into the main growing points and into the tomato production itself, or tomato formation. This plant's pretty good, and they're starting to flower pretty good already. Some of that pollen going. You okay? So remember last year during another one of the heat waves that we had, Callie collapsed from heat stroke, and everybody was concerned, as was I. And part of the concern was not much you can do when you're back in the bush, as far as I am, without any power for air conditioning or ice or anything else to help cool her down quickly. So what I did is I just carried her down to the stream and put her in the water up to her belly so she could cool off. But 2 things I've done since then. I had a lot of suggestions about getting an air conditioner, and I thought, well, that's not feasible. It's not practical for out here in the forest. How can I get one back there, and how can I power it? But since then, doing some research, ended up finding this EcoFlow Wave portable air conditioner. That and the freezer that I was able to put into the cellar and power by solar power. So now I have ice cubes in there as well. So if it happens again this year, I'm a lot better prepared. The challenge with portable anything is trying to get the balance between portability, usability, efficiency, and power consumption. And this Wave actually does all of those things. The battery here is about, 7.5 kilograms? Something like 15 pounds for that little battery. And then the unit itself is about 35 pounds, 36 pounds, so 17 kilograms or something like that. So it's easy to lift, carry around, And because I'm using it in so many different situations, like the cellar, the greenhouse. The workshop, or for camping when my daughters go camping together, they'll probably use this thing for those hot days, because you know how hot it gets in a tent if you've ever been in one, and in summer, especially when the sun comes back out and beats on there, it's going to be over 40 degrees Celsius. So I'm sure they'll use it for that. The two cellars, this air exchange between the two, the several compartments that I've got in each of the cellars. Lots of options for putting it in different places, which for me is, you know, a fixed air conditioner wouldn't work. And this thing's actually just as powerful as a fixed air conditioner anyway. 4,000 BTUs, can run DC direct current. This would be about 28% more efficient than an AC powered unit, for example. And with the separate power pack, which I also have, I can plug that DC power directly in here to the unit instead of going through the AC power cord, which is also an option for charging and for running the things, to plug it into any other typical wall outlet. It can also plug into a DC socket, like the one like you would have in your car or on a boat or something. And then of course the battery pack. So several ways to run it, several ways to charge it. You can actually just put it on a fan setting as well, so it's just blowing air around. And of course you can set the thermostat so that it just gets the room to that temperature and then shuts off. So using the app or using the interface here, you can program it to maximize the runtime. So you can get 8 hours of runtime, but it can go all the way up to 16 if it's turning on and off based on the actual needs that you have. I guess the greenhouse is probably a good example of that. It's no point running this thing in the middle of the night or early in the morning, so I'd probably program it to come on either at a certain temperature inside the greenhouse, or to come on at a certain time, say 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and run it from say 2 to 5 when the greenhouse is actually too hot for the plants. This will cool it down a little bit. One thing I wasn't sure of is how noisy this was going to be. If it's going to be annoying, let's say in a campground, if the girls are camping somewhere where there's other people, like in a car campground, under 55 decibels when the fan's on high and the air conditioner is on. So not a big deal. It's not going to be any more disruptive than anything else, talking or campfire or something. Now another thing, especially when I do lend it out to the girls, is that maintenance is not an issue with this thing. There's really nothing to do. There is a tap on the back here for draining, because air conditioners do take humidity out of the air and as it's condensing it, but this unit actually sends that water vapor over an evaporator, which evaporates most of that moisture. But you can, if you bypass that for more efficient use, hook this little hose up. That just plugs right in there, and then you can just drain that anywhere. Put it outside the tent if you have in the tent, or outside the cellar or whatever, or into a bucket. So thanks to everybody who actually suggested that I get an air conditioner for Cali specifically. It has been helpful already, and I'm sure it's going to be later this summer. Just going to give them a soaking for about an hour and throw them in my backpack wrapped in plastic and just go for a walk with the shovel. This meadow behind me, so originally this was a beaver pond. Well, I guess I don't know what original means. Before I arrived, this was a beaver pond, well before, and a couple of dams. One is right there in front of the cabin, which is the end of the meadow, and then it drops down, and then there's another meadow beyond, so we have that little waterfall between it. When the pond was full, like when that beaver dam was intact, there was another waterfall over behind the little island there. And then it looks like originally halfway down the meadow there was another beaver dam at some point. So this was all flooded. Now it's reverting back to eventually forest, maybe, but maybe not, because it's all really sandy and really sort of boggy. That whole meadow is wet, even though the dam is mostly gone. So it's really acidic. So what's happened is it's become really thick with sphagnum moss, and then other bog-loving plants. So bog rosemary, Labrador tea, a lot of this spirea around the perimeter. Got cranberries in the meadow. What else? Just a whole bunch of acid-loving, bog-loving plants. But the whole perimeter has all these wild blueberries, and they're all small. But until I took these trees down for this clearing here, they weren't getting much sunlight and not very much fertilization, so they would only produce a few blueberries per plant. I don't know if it's early enough to improve that much this year, but I'm also spreading some like compost around this garden, and as the roots from these pre-existing wild blueberries come in contact with that, they're going to actually flush out and perform a little bit better. So I expect over time they're just going to continue to improve as I continue to improve the soil and deepen it by adding all the mulch layer, like all this hay this year, and wood chips, and then probably in the future just wood chips and leaves, and all the herbaceous material that I'm growing specifically for compost, like the comfrey and stinging nettle that I mentioned. So I'll continue to build this fertility, and I'm sure that's going to continue to improve the quality of the existing plants, the wild plants, as well as any things that I'm planting. So I'm planting some different cultivars of blueberries and raspberries and blackberries, elderberries, a whole bunch of berries, lingonberry, thimbleberry, jostaberry, seaberry, what else, cherry. Anyway, all of those things are going to continue to improve over time is my point. And for natural nitrogen fixers, what we have here is these alders out in the meadow here. Those are really effective natural nitrogen fixers that improve the growing conditions for the rest of the plants around them. So I might do some transplants of some of those up into the garden itself. But mainly I'm using things like lupins and the sea berries to fix the nitrogen, and a couple of little black locusts that'll let grow up and then continue to coppice or chop down. Some of the other berries, I've got this bunchberry dogwood flowering right now. It's beautiful. Quite a carpet throughout the edge of the forest, so I'll leave those. Obviously they're great wildlife berries and flowers for pollinators, so they'll continue to thrive here. And then I've got all my climbers that I'm going to train onto this fence. This is basically going to be a huge trellis. It's 100 feet long, this clearing, and at the deepest point it's about 100 feet wide. And I'll sort of plant beyond the fringes of this things that I'm not worried about deer and moose and bear eating. So it'll be bigger than that, but the fence itself being 100 by, say, average of 75, it's 175, so 350 total of linear growing space. That's on average 6 to 7 feet high. So I've got different types of grape, including some native grape, wild grape. I've got a Schisandra vine and kiwi, hardy kiwi. We got 3 plants of those I just planted along the north fence there. And then I'll grow annuals like climbing beans, pole beans, tomatoes, and squashes and things like that. But for this year, with all this nice thick mulch layer I've got everywhere, wood chips and hay, I'm going to let the melons and the squashes ramble over the ground and use that to act as the ground cover to stop or slow down evaporation from the sun. Basically, I want full coverage. I don't want any of this old soil exposed to sunlight. That'll help hold the water in, and the organic material that's sitting on top will then also decompose quicker and add create soil. But it's exciting to see all this natural stuff coming up, all this wild native plant material, and how much of it I can just encourage and leave here on top of just to add to what I'm planting. Yeah, like there, I planted a blueberry cultivar, and it was sort of a common blueberry, so not much different than the wild cultivar. And than the wild variety, and I see all around it I've got tons of wild blueberry coming up, probably because of that new exposure to sunlight. So I'm going to have quite a crop of antioxidants this year, but especially over the next 2 or 3 years and beyond. Oh, I've got service berries here too. I just planted a bunch of. These are the hazelnuts. Now they've been in transit for what 2 weeks or something like that. So I'm a little bit concerned about them. They are starting to leaf out, which ideally would have been better if they were completely dormant. But the roots are fairly dry too. So I'm soaking these roots for an hour, maybe a little bit longer, and then I'll get planting them. Atta girl. Walk a bit. No, that's not good water to drink. A whole stream full of clean, cold water.
Hi, Kelly. Get bugs on you? Well, that was perfect timing. I literally just finished planting the last of the plants that I had on order and that what I had delivered and picked up. So I'm going to put a complete list in the description below, everything that I planted this year. There's a huge variety of perennials, trees and bushes and perennial herbaceous plants, roots, vines, all kinds of stuff. And then a ton of annual vegetables as well. The garden areas comprise about 20,000 square feet total, so about half an acre. And then I've got trees and bushes, fruit trees and bushes scattered throughout the property. So I'm not sure how many linear feet that would be, but anyway, all the places that the game is. And as you can see by the trail camera, one of the main trails that I use that's on right on the property, that's heavily used by a lot of wildlife. And you can see that one clip where a bear is chasing another bear. You can just see it exiting the screen on the right hand side, and then the other one comes running through. That looked like a young bear that wouldn't be at breeding age, although it would have been getting pretty close to breeding season, so I'm not sure if that's what was going on or what it was. Could have been another animal, I guess. I'm guessing that it was a bear just by the form and the black as it exited the screen. And that bear, that young one, I think it's probably the bear I had on camera last year. You can see that it's feeding on the grass and stuff in that clearing, and he was kind of going, even though it was like a month later, to where I had planted each of the Jerusalem artichokes, the sunchokes. I'm not sure if he dug those up or not. I couldn't find the vegetation. I'll check again later. But anyway, lots of wildlife food and lots of people food. So I'll continue over time to add more diversity, so more plants, species, as well as more larger quantity of some of them. Just kind of get the food kind of spread everywhere throughout the property. So now I can get back to the structure building. So get the home built, which I'm excited to do. Hopefully these bugs aren't going to impede me too much over the next month or so before they start really dying down again. But anyway, I'll just keep a smoky fire going around me like I normally do when I'm working in those conditions. So I'm really glad that I took the time. I know it's impacted the channel, impacted you guys watching the channel. You're not seeing the typical content you would see from me. It's been very garden focused and food. But food security and food abundance is one of the primary requirements of self-reliance, self-sufficiency. So by getting all these perennials in this year, sort of dropping what I was doing to focus on that, it's going to give me that food security, our family, the food security, not so much this year, but each year it's only going to improve and give us more self-sufficiency. So it was really important that I took the time to do that, get those plants established now so they have time to mature and start producing sooner than later. Now, one of the next things I need to do is get the solar systems set up so that I'm energy self-sufficient as well. So that is going to happen throughout the summer. By fall, I'll have systems in place for the cellars, for the cabin, greenhouse, more permanent systems. Still going to have some mobile systems for a couple of the applications, but for the most part, I'll have some permanent applications for creating energy as well and storing energy. All of these things are sort of a departure from what I originally intended when I started this foray into self-reliance and on the channel. I've had to give up a lot of the romance and the ideals just for practicality, especially because I have a family. So things like the air conditioner, the solar panels, the multiple solar panels and solar storage systems. On the weekend we actually drove several hours to pick up a used wood cook stove that's going to go in the outdoor kitchen. Not what I intended for that outdoor kitchen, but practically speaking, I just won't get to it this year, and I need to have that thing operating by harvest season, by fall, late summer, fall. So to be able to use something like a stove rather than wait for me to build the earthen oven and barbecue, like grill and those kind of things. So I'm sacrificing a lot of my values and my ideals in order to get things in place, and then once that's established and my family is also comfortable, then I can focus back on creating those things the way I want them to be, such as the rustic outdoor oven, like I mentioned, the pizza oven or the bread oven. Just one of many things. The composting toilet that's going in the cabin, instead of just using the outhouse, the going to put a portable shower system inside the cabin, although the outdoor shower and outdoor sauna will be probably utilized more in the future. So, in other words, get all these somewhat quasi-modern or compromised modern systems in place now, and then make sure I have backup systems that don't require any modern materials or energy in order to function. So if we lose those modern conveniences, then we can still function fully. Water is another example of that. Anyway, I've got to get back to it, but thanks as always for watching, not just this video, but for sticking with me through the years and being patient through this phase of the self-reliance journey. And hopefully you'll stick around to see what's next. So thanks for watching, I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you back here at the cabin next time. Take care.